All right, let's get this started. My name is Larry Marker. I am, and this is a big deal to me, and it's going to be a big deal to southeastern New Mexico because I'm going to go to Washington, D.C., and we're going to fire them up. My name is Larry Marker. I am your America First Republican candidate for the United States Senate, headed to Washington, D.C. My foundation is faith, family, and country. If you're a Tom Landry fan, it's God, family, country. That's how I grew up believing it. That was a Tom Landry quote from way back. I've been, my entire adult life, I've been self-employed. I've been in the oil and gas industry. I've had businesses in agriculture on the farm out north of Roswell, on little stripper wells around Chaves County, Eddy County, Lee County, New Mexico, most recently. I've dabbled a little bit in manufacturing, was in the garage door business for about 20 years, done a lot of different things. Now, being in small business, and especially when I got bigger in the oil and gas industry, being a small businessman in the state of New Mexico, and I assume it's like this all over the country. I'm not sure, I wasn't there, but I do know. In New Mexico, I've seen the devastating effects of overregulation, burdensome regulations, and out-of-control regulatory agencies, not only on the oil and gas industry, but also on agriculture. Unfortunately, and especially the past decade or so, I've seen the progressive left do everything they possibly can to dismantle our society and destroy the American way of life. I've spent the last 10 years of my life, most of the last 10 years of my life, and personal resources challenging laws and policies all over the state of New Mexico. Those laws and policies severely restrict our civil liberties and our rights and our God-given rights as American citizens. When I get to Washington, D.C., I'm not only going to carry your voice, I'm going to carry your values, I'm going to carry your morals, and I'm going to carry your principles. And by God, I'm going to carry your fight to Washington, D.C. We are the primary, as most of you know, I am in the primary as a write-in candidate. Once we get past the primary, I will be on the ballot, named on the ballot as the Republican nominee, your Republican nominee for U.S. Senate. To get past the primary, we need 2,400 written votes. You got to color in the bubble and write my name. We're at the top of the ballot. The very first position you see is a write-in candidate for U.S. Senate on the primary ballot. Write in color in the bubble, write in Larry Marker. Again, we need 2,400 votes to win the primary. We are unopposed, but we still have to get a minimum number of votes. We do that, we're going to face Ben Ray Lujan in November. I guarantee you, I will exhaust every resource and every bit of energy I have to beat him in the general election, and I will get to Washington, D.C. So by the middle of next January, we're going to have a Republican, an American First Republican in the United States Senate in Washington, D.C. We haven't had a Republican in the United States Senate since 2008. He was elected in 2002. It's been a long drought. I would love to answer any questions. I'm not that well known in this area. I'm known to a few of you. I've worked with a lot of you on grassroots efforts, and those grassroots efforts actually extended all across the state. We have people all across the state of New Mexico that have helped us with various different activist grassroots and efforts, whatever you want to call it, the referendum project, citizens petitions for grand jury. I've pursued multiple causes of action in court trying to fight the COVID mandates, the horrendous and disgusting abortion laws we have in the state of New Mexico. I've got a hearing next Friday on the expansion of the services to be provided by that abortion clinic in Las Cruces. They're trying to expand those services in that clinic to include gender-affirming health care, which, as you know, because our referendum project failed, in New Mexico, a child can enter the transitioning process without parental consent. That's the most disgusting law in the entire nation. Anyway, if you have any questions, want to know anything about me, whether they're personal questions, whatever, it does not matter. It's kind of tough to see your hands, so you can even yell, I don't care. Uh-oh, this is going to be a tough one.
All right, Larry Marker.
Yes, ma'am.
I know that you've run a couple of campaigns, one statewide as land commissioner, as a write-in, independent, and then you ran again for Senate, for state Senate. You lost both times, so tell me what's different and how we're going to win this time.
Okay, and that's a tough question. She's actually my campaign manager. She kind of blindsided me right there a little bit. Hate it when that happens. What I'm going to tell you, I've lived I'm 62 years old. I've had a fantastic life. If God called me home tomorrow, I'd have to high five him and say, you know what, that was a pretty good ride. But I will tell you, there have been some tough times. There definitely been some tough times, and what I've learned in this life, and again, it's been reinforced through those defeats. Yes, I was defeated in both of those races, but one thing I will tell you, I learned a lot. That makes me more qualified than anybody on this planet to run as a write-in candidate in the primary for the United States Senate. And the other thing that I'm going to tell you this, and this gets a little closer to the heart. I've known a lot of men in my life that have lost everything they've owned, whether it's through drugs. There again, a lot of my friends are out of business right now because of regulatory agencies, and we're getting a little emotional here. But I'm gonna leave that question with this. You don't measure a man by how many times he falls down. You measure that old boy by how many times he gets up and what he does when he gets up. She's been ignored all morning. Ryan doesn't do that on purpose. He's a good man.
Hi, you make emphasis on America first, and I'd like you to define that because I hear in the media nowadays there's a division, and when you say American first, they're American first. I can tell you right now, I'm pro-military.
Yes, ma'am.
So I'm not gonna, I don't know you, and I want to know you and your values.
Yes, ma'am.
And does that include pro-military, or when you say American first, or you're like, I'm not about the war in Iraq? And
I'm not an isolationist by any stretch of the imagination, if that's what you're asking. I have a great deal of respect for the military. When I was growing up, I got out of high school and Ronald Reagan was the president. He was the Peace Through Strength president. A lot of the men that at that time we were boys that I went to school with, most of us went to work on drilling rigs out in the oil field and stuff. I did not join the military, and sometimes I regret that. But what I will tell you, nobody is going to fight harder to keep the military funded than I will. I have a great deal of respect. Also, being from New Mexico, you can look at things what New Mexico has contributed to the defense of this country. I'm always going to bring that up. Now, as far as America first, how am I going to define America first? I like to say typically, and then I was told this week not to introduce a new phrase or whatever. Not only am I an America first Republican, I'm an American first Republican. When I say America first, I mean what we're doing outside of the borders of the United States, how we protect our borders, how the allies that we can depend on, the allies that support us, the allies that go help us rescue our stranded airmen, those guys are our allies. Those are America first allies. When I say America first, if you were to ask me if Taiwan gets attacked by China, do we put boots on the ground? Well, with the technology we have now, we can do a pretty good job of whipping people without putting boots on the ground. We have the technology to do that, and thank God for that. But I will tell you, anytime that we enter into a confrontation or into a military action, I think the first order is, what does this do for the United States of America and the citizens of the United States? I'm not an isolationist by any stretch of the imagination, but I do depend on, if we're an ally, we can expect a 50-50 ally. We don't need somebody that's sometimes in our corner and sometimes not in our corner. And we could get into NATO in a big, long discussion about that. But what I will tell you is America first, in my opinion, is what we do. Outside of these borders, we put America first in our relationships with other countries. We put America first, and we close our borders. The people that come in here, they're going to come in here legally, and they're going to assimilate, and then they're going to become part of this culture. Part of what has made this country so strong is we've assimilated some of the best parts of the other cultures into the United States. We all love Allsup's burritos. But anyway, when I say American first, I'm talking about what you're doing for the Americans inside the United States. If we're going to spend millions of dollars housing anybody, we're going to house people on the Navajo reservation, and we're going to house our veterans before we house millions of illegal aliens from all over the world. Thank you for that question. I got a little upset there. Sorry about that. Anybody else? Any question you got? It can get as personal as you want. And I need to get to know you people as much as possible, because I will be in Washington, D.C., and when I'm there, I'm going to put a little bit of the onerous on you. I have got to have you come see me. Okay.
Okay, good.
I'm going to have to see people from back home. Yes, ma'am.
I've been in some of your court hearings and listened to you present cases pretty good. Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
So I'm
And
hoping
thank
that-
you for your support. That's important for those judges to see that we've got people behind me.
But at this point, Ben Ray Lupon, I think his campaign's going to be more of a complacent one
Yes, ma'am.
based on what's already been. People tend to not like change. They especially don't like scary change. Do you have a specific way you can focus them on a change that complacent people are going to actually want to make?
Okay, first off, the scary change you mentioned is probably me. I am a grassroots candidate. I'm not a traditional Republican. We're going to address the scary candidate first. And some of the people in this room are probably a little uncomfortable with a grassroots conservative Republican candidate. I do not blame you for that. What I will tell you, a traditional Republican was not available for this position. I don't know the reasons why. I don't care the reasons why. But when we missed the deadline to be named on the ballot, to name on the ballot a Republican nominee, we missed the deadline. As you know, we didn't have anybody. I got a few calls, said a few prayers, crunched a few numbers, and this is going to answer the rest of your question. I crunched a few numbers, and I got to praying, obviously. I'm an optimistic person, and I'm going to jump off in a fight no matter what. Sometimes a guy just got to jump in there and get his tail whipped. And if you've been to some of my court hearings, you've seen the judges beat me up pretty good. But we stand our ground and we fight back. Anyway, I prayed about it, thought about it, went to a powerlift meet in Oklahoma City. Believe it or not, I'm a powerlifter. I'm in the old skinny guy division, so I do pretty well. Didn't have a very good meet, but it gave me a long drive coming back home, and I prayed about it, and I said, you know what? After crunching the numbers in the motel that night, I think we can do this. I'm going to share with you some of those numbers here in a second. I had people from all over this state, people that had helped me with referendum projects against citizens petition for grand jury, people that had been to court with me, people that had filed motions to intervene in various different efforts that we tried in the New Mexico judicial system, which is a whole nother story, and that's something else we're going to take care of when we get to D.C. We're going to do some judicial reform, top to bottom. Anyway, prayed about it, and I decided, you know what, we can do this. I thought I was done with politics. Tracy De La Rosa, she was one of the leaders of that referendum project. I am here to tell you we tried to get 6 bills put on the ballot. The people that stayed in New Mexico need to decide what a parent's rights are, not the government. The people in New Mexico need to decide when it's okay to slaughter a baby, which is absolutely never. Don't get me on my pro-life deal because I'm running for U.S. Senate. That's a state deal. Anyway, that defeat got to me pretty good. That was a and excuse my language, that was a butt whip, and I had a hard time getting over. So I was licking my wounds over that one, trying to rebuild my life after my fights with the Bureau of Land Management, the New Mexico State Land Office. You can imagine how much fun that was after running for state land commissioner. New Mexico OCD, any regulatory agency that could do their best to put me out of business was chasing me. Well, taking that tail whipping on the referendum, I decided, okay, I'm going to step back out of politics. Well, I'm coming home, I'm praying, and I'm taking the long way around and rambling just a little bit. And I decided, you know what, I think we can do this after crunching the numbers, and here's why. I looked at the numbers in 2020, the numbers of registered Republicans in 2020, the number of registered Democrats in 2020, and independents. They call them DTS now. In 2026, we have 57,000 more registered Republicans in the state of New Mexico than we had in 2020. Now, some of you guys are sitting there thinking, well, how many more Democrats do we have? We have 7,000 fewer registered Democrats in the state of New Mexico in 2026. Now, how is that going to help us? Well, Ben Ray Lujan beat Mark Ronchetti for this position in 2020 by 56,000 votes. We have a net gain of registered voters of 64,000. You can do the math. Things are starting to look better. Every single month, we look at registration numbers. It's a little bit tough when you're considering the DTS or the decline to state, because anytime somebody interacts with the state agency, they automatically get registered. The default register is DTS. So those numbers we're having a hard time getting a grip on. So we're basically using the independent numbers from before that law took effect. But right now, every single month, the Republican registrations outpace the Democrat registration, and it's not even close. We're talking at least 100 to 1, and in some areas, a lot more than that. There's only 3 areas in the state that have more registered Democrats than they had in 2020, and those numbers are very small, but the number of newly registered Republicans in those areas far outpaces that, and by thousands in those particular cases. So what I'm here to tell you is we have the momentum. The conservatives, the conservative Republicans, the conservative grassroots, which a lot of those guys are in, a lot of those men and women are independents. So that tells me that we have a shot at this. And just like Doug was telling you, we have a unique opportunity. Another advantage we have is that gerrymandering does not affect our Senate race. It doesn't matter what district you're in or what congressional district or representative district or whatever. You get to vote with every other citizen in the state of New Mexico. What's going to be critical is that we get out the vote. If we can outpace the Democrats in the primary, typical primary, there again, I'm cutting myself off, but the typical primary turnout in New Mexico in the midterms is about between 23 and 26%. If we could up that to 40%, obviously that would be fantastic in the primary. Now, when you get to and that would be an indicator that would generate a lot of interest moving into the general election. And it would also be good for me because the better we turn out, and this is the point I was trying to make and it slipped my mind, the better we turn out in the primaries, the better it looks for us as a state so we can attract national money to come into New Mexico and help us beat some of these Republicans because they've got a lot of money. So the better we do in the primaries, the more attractive we're going to look to outside funds, to major donors outside of the state of New Mexico. Once we get to the general, typical midterm turnout in New Mexico is about 46%. Let's say that if we turned out 12% and 13%. If we turned out 13%, and just figure Republicans and Democrats, if we turn out 13% more Republicans to vote than Democrats, we will run the table on every statewide race we have in the state of New Mexico. That's phenomenal. We've never had that opportunity. We haven't won a statewide race in New Mexico since 2016. We have an unprecedented opportunity to have the biggest turnaround, the biggest political upheaval in history right here in New Mexico. We could go from not having a Republican statewide candidate win a race since 2016 to running the table in the general election and going to Washington, D.C. That would put us 3 congressional. We would have Zamora, Dee, I can't say Dee Dee's last name, so I just call her Dee, and then we would have Cunningham as our representatives, and I would be up there as your United States Senator. Any other questions? I got a little long-winded on that one, I'm sorry.
Got a question for you, sir.
Yes, sir.
I'm Herman Chavez, man of God and resident of our city, sir.
Yes, sir.
My question is about the Second Amendment. Recently, you see a buyback program run by our governor in Albuquerque.
Yes, sir.
Which I think is kind of unusual. She's more focused on removing guns instead of placing fathers back in home to lead their families towards Christ. I think.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And that gets to the responsibility. Yes, sir.
But my question is, what's your stance on the Second Amendment and the buyback program, and how can we stop that? Because that's an infringement on my rights, and it's very important to me.
Okay, this is. I will be in Washington, D.C., and this is one of those issues that is actually, I get to come to New Mexico as your U.S. Senator, and I get to challenge the state of New Mexico on. If you read the federal Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, it says specific things, Second Amendment, right to bear arms, all of that. Now, when you read the New Mexico Constitution, which I've studied that a lot in the last 10 years, a whole lot. When you read the New Mexico Constitution actually reinforces and makes stronger the Second Amendment the way it's supposed to be enforced here in the state of New Mexico. Those buyback programs are completely illegal, and she's violating federal law when she does that. And I promise you, they're going to hear about it when I'm in D.C. That was a good question. Thank you. Anything else? We good? I wasn't supposed to end this like this. Hey, what we need, this guy's working with me here. What we need here, I'm supposed to give you some rally cry as we pull out of here. But you know what? We're in Clovis, New Mexico. I've got to know a lot of people in Curry County. I actually lived here a little while when I was a kid. What I know about the people in the state of New Mexico, all over the state of New Mexico, and I've met a bunch of them in the last 10 years, you're not going to find a harder working bunch of people anywhere on this planet. I don't care what people say about New Mexico. New Mexico is not a liberal progressive state. I've been all over it. I met the people. The problem is the people like you're like me. And I was telling Pat Woods earlier a little story. You're like me. You just want to be left alone. Well, when I get to Washington, D.C., I can promise you at some point in the next 6 years, some of those people are going to look at each other and they're going to say, you know what, maybe we should have left them people alone and they wouldn't have come up here in Washington, D.C. I appreciate you guys being here. I appreciate the... Okay, there is some discussion about the write-in, how you do it. I do have some experience as a write-in candidate, and that's actually very helpful because now we're really focused on, and the state party's helping me a lot. They're focusing the Secretary of State on training the precinct captains. The law says you could write my initial and marker behind it. The law specifically says if the precinct captain can look at that signature and tell who you're going to vote, you wanted to vote for, the vote counts. The problem is the precinct captain may not know the law. So what we have to do is write Larry Marker, remove all doubt, and that way your vote will count. Color in the bubble and write Larry Marker, that vote will count. Now, the reason it's an issue, every one of those ballots gets looked at, and it's part of the reason I ran as a write-in candidate before. We were looking at some election integrity stuff, and we wanted to be able to prove that all votes weren't counted. All votes weren't counted, but that's a whole nother issue with the New Mexico judicial system. We're not going to go into that today. But when you write a candidate's name, and you're going to have statewide, we've got 3 write-in candidates. When you feed your ballot into that machine, it'll click that it got counted. It'll click on the tally, but it goes into a different tray. It's called the adjudication tray. That tray only holds 150 ballots. So the precinct captain has to realize that if that tray gets full, there's a problem. They need to, you got the chain of custody laws, and De La Rosa is actually a precinct captain. But you've got the chain of custody laws. They're going to have to empty that tray probably multiple times that evening. But they have to look at each one of those signatures. If it's a ballot, they have to look at each one of those ballots, which is actually a huge advantage when you're talking election integrity. That's when they decide if that vote should count. Obviously, we believe that most of them are going to be trained. They're going to see Larry Marker or L Marker or something like that, and they're going to count that as a valid vote. Again, we only need 2,400 votes to get our name on the ballot, but we need a lot more votes than that to show the national party and these national donors that this is serious and we can take. The grassroots in New Mexico has a candidate for the United States Senate. That's never happened in the history of this state. So we need to show the national party and the national big donors that a grassroots candidate can run a viable, legitimate campaign in the primary, and they'll support us financially in the general, and we're going to have that to beat Ben Ray Lujan.